The Unkillable Soldier, Adrien Carton de Wart. Born into the Belgian aristocracy in 1880, his life was shaped by a series of global conflicts, starting with the Second Boer War and spanning through both world wars. His brush with death started after he left Oxford University to enlist in the British Army in 1899. He faked his age and name in order to be able to go into combat in the Second Boer War, and was soon on his way to South Africa. There he was shot in the stomach and groin and was sent to recover in England. In 1901, he returned to South Africa for active duty. This time he enlisted under his real identity and served as a commissioned officer until the end of the war in 1902. In 1907, he became a British citizen and for a few years played aristocrat. He also made time to marry and start a family. But then in 1914, World War I broke out and he was back in the military service. His first campaign was to quell a rebellion in British Somaliland. There he was a part of the Somaliland Camel Corps and he rode into battle against the forces of Somali leader Muhammad Abdul Hassan. Despite the Brits' successful assault on a Somali fort, things did not go well for Carton de Wart. He was shot twice in the face, losing his left eye and part of his left ear. He was awarded a Distinguished Service Medal and a glass eye, but he soon found that the glass eye aggravated him, so he allegedly flung it out of a taxi window and opted instead for a black eye patch. By early 1915, he was fighting in the trenches on the Western Front. During the Second Battle of Ypres, his left hand was shattered by a bombardment from German artillery. According to his memoirs, he tore off 2 of his own fingers after the doctors wouldn't amputate it. Later that year, a surgeon removed his now mangled hand entirely. Undeterred and seemingly unimpaired, he went on to fight in the Battle of the Somme, during which his men recall seeing the now one-handed man pull pins from grenades with his teeth and then fling them with his one good hand into enemy territory. He further distinguished himself in the battle during the assault on the village of La Boissine, France in 1916. When 3 unit commanders from the 8th Battalion were killed, he then took charge of all 3 units and together they managed to hold the advancing enemy back. For his bravery, the 36-year-old was awarded the Victoria Cross. Adrien's ability to lead from the front in some of the biggest hellholes of World War I counted for the sheer numbers of critical injuries he suffered. In the trenches of the Devil's Wood, for example, he received what would normally be a kill shot to the back of the head, but he survived. During 3 subsequent battles, he was shot in the ankle, hip, and leg, but soon regained full mobility. His final bullet wound was a relatively superficial one to his ear. Despite his losses of various body parts, he said, "Frankly, I had enjoyed the war, and wherever there was a war, he was sure to find it." Between 1919 and 1921, he commanded the British effort to aid Poland, which was engaged in multiple conflicts with the Soviet Bolsheviks, the Ukrainians, the Lithuanians, and the Czechs over territory. In 1919, he survived 2 plane crashes, one of which resulted in a brief period of Lithuanian captivity. Then in August 1920, Cossacks attempted to hijack his observation train. He took them on single-handedly, armed only with a revolver. During the fight, he fell onto the track, but leapt straight back onto the moving train and took care of the rest of them. He became quite taken with the place and decided to remain there after the Poles won the war in 1921. He retired with the honorary rank of Major General in 1923 and spent the next 15 years shooting daily at his Polish estate. Unfortunately, peace was relatively short-lived for the Poles, who were devastated by the attacks from both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union during the opening months of World War II. He was forced to escape Poland and then headed back to Great Britain, where he re-enlisted in the British Army. Back in the fray, he was sent to Norway to take command of an Anglo-French force in 1940, but his arrival set the tone for a catastrophic mission to come. His seaplane was forced to land when it was attacked by a German fighter plane. In true Adrien Carton de Wart style, he refused to go into a rubber dinghy because it would be a sitting duck. Instead, he waited in the wreckage until the enemy plane literally ran out of ammunition and flew off. Then a naval vessel was sent over, and he casually got in and was taken to shore. He didn't last very long in Norway. His forces were outgunned and undersupplied. Still, under his leadership, his forces managed to traverse over mountains and get to Triham, all while being bombarded by the Germans, withstanding artillery strikes from the German Navy and avoiding German ski troops. Ultimately, the Royal Navy, while under bombardment, managed to ferry the men out of Norway to safety. And Carton de Wart arrived in Great Britain on his 60th birthday. In April 1941, he was appointed by Winston Churchill to lead a British mission in Yugoslavia, but he never got there. En route to Yugoslavia, his Wellington bomber suddenly took a nosedive into the Mediterranean. He and the British Air Force crew took refuge on the wing until it started to sink. Then the 61-year-old Adrien Carton de Wart helped an injured, struggling comrade swim the mile to shore. As soon as they made it to the coastline, they were captured by the Italians, where he was one of the 13 high-ranking officers held prisoner. But then, it was like something out of The Great Escape, but starring senior citizens. The prisoners refused to stay incarcerated and mounted numerous numerous attempts to escape. Determined, they even excavated a 60-foot tunnel through solid bedrock over a labor-intensive 7 months until 6 of them escaped in March 1943. They dress as Italian peasants, but a one-handed man with a black eye patch proved to be suspicious. And after 8 days, he was soon returned to prison. Yet the war was not over for him. The Italians decided that they wanted to switch sides and took Carton de Wart to Rome to help him negotiate with the Allies. On August 28, 1943, he returned to Great Britain, but was only back for a month before he was given a new assignment. This time as Churchill's special representative to Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek. Before heading to China, he accompanied Chiang Kai-shek to the Cairo Conference, where the Allies discussed Japan's post-war future. After the conference, Carton de Wart remained in China for 4 years, where he managed to experience yet another plane crash. Finally, in 1947, he retired, even then sustaining yet another injury. On his way back to England from China, he stopped off in Rangoon and slipped down a flight of stairs, breaking his back and knocking himself unconscious. During his recovery, the doctor removed a huge amount of shrapnel from his war-torn body. Depending on your perspective, Adrien Carton de Wart was either the luckiest or unluckiest soldier to have ever lived. War Story 2. Chips the dog stormed an Italian machine gun nest by himself and captured 4 enemy soldiers. Chips was a mixed breed dog, part German Shepherd, part Collie, and part Siberian Husky, who served with the 3rd Infantry Division of the United States. Born in 1940, he was donated to the war effort as part of the Dogs Defense Program, which aimed to train domestic dogs for military use. Among thousands of dogs that served in World War II, Chip stands out for his remarkable acts of bravery during the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. On July 10, 1943, as the Allies initiated their invasion of Sicily, Chips and his handler were a part of a unit tasked with capturing an enemy-held beach. The unit came under heavy fire from an Italian machine gun nest, effectively pinning them down and causing several casualties. Without any human command, Chips broke free from his handler and charged towards the machine gun nest. The machine gun nest was armed with an Italian Beretta Model 37, capable of firing 500 rounds per minute, with each round having the potential to cause fatal injuries to the soldiers. Chips, weighing roughly 40 pounds and standing about 24 inches tall at the shoulder, would have been an easy target as he ran across the open ground, which spanned about 30 yards between his unit and the enemy position. Despite the hail of bullets, Chips managed to reach the nest, where he attacked the 4 Italian soldiers operating the gun. Chips' ferocious attack led to the surrender of the soldiers, and he allegedly grabbed one by the throat, while his mere presence and aggression caused the others to cease fire and surrender. Chips' handler and the accompanying soldiers then quickly followed up, securing the position and capturing the enemy soldiers. For his valor, Chips was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and the Purple Heart. However, due to regulations against awarding military decorations to animals, these awards were later revoked. War Story 3. Attack of the Deadmen. The setting for August 1915 engagement was the Oswiec Fortress in what is now northeast Poland. Built by the Russian Empire in the previous century, it was an epic thorn in the side of Germany's plan for conquest, and that was the point. It was located in the area where surrounding marshland could be crossed, and the desire was to prevent the Germans from doing so. During World War I, the Germans attempted to take it on several occasions, surviving heavy artillery fire. Even the Russians were surprised it had held up to such an onslaught. To get inside, they had to cross 2 sets of trenches before facing the walls and battlements where they could be picked off by shooters. Amazingly, this multi-layered defense system meant the Russians didn't need many soldiers to man the fort. The first attack in September 1914 saw the Russians take on 40 infantry battalions of the German 8th Army and heavy artillery. They successfully pushed them back. The second following winter, another heavy bombardment repelled, but the Germans weren't ready to give up just yet. Kaiser Wilhelm II needed Russia out of the way, and reducing Oswiec Fortress to rubble was a major priority. In August 1915, he brought out the big guns. There were guns, of course, but this is in reference to a human-shaped weapon. Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg. Accompanying him on his march to the site were 14 infantry battalions, a Sapper battalion, 30 artillery batteries, and 24 to 30 heavy siege guns, with approximately 900 Russians against an estimated 7,000 Germans. The odds looked hopeless. Still, the mighty structure of the Oswiec Fortress had served them well before. No doubt it would do so again. However, this time there was a factor the Russians hadn't faced before. The enemy had brought with them a deadly cocktail to inflict maximum damage. On the fateful morning of August 6, 1915, the German army, numbering in the thousands and equipped with the era's most advanced weaponry, stood ready to deliver what they believed would be the final blow to the Russian defenders at the Oswiec Fortress. Their artillery had bombarded the fortress for weeks, with over 30,000 shells aimed at weakening the Russian resolve and defenses. At 4 a.m. on the 24th of July, the gas was released. It was of a dark green color, the exact recipe of it having chlorine in its base, was hard to determine. The dense cloud of gas reached the trenches after only 5 to 10 minutes. It was heading towards the fortress fast, having a high speed and expanding to the sides. The impact of the gas cloud was such that, on one hand, it created a cover hiding the movements of the enemy, and on the other hand, it brought lethal poisoning to everything it touched. The first victims of the poison fumes were scout parties and secret sentries, who all died. The Germans knew their gas would be incredibly effective because they realized the Russian and Polish soldiers did not have protective gas masks. They may have had some cloth masks, but in all, they were ill-equipped to fend off a chemical strike. Blood-drenched, the Russian and Polish soldiers' uniforms, urine-soaked rags covered their face as they coughed up gory bits. The mixture of chlorine and bromine gas started to melt away their flesh, destroy their eyes, and dissolve their lungs. The German soldiers thought that they would be entering a nearly lifeless area, but instead, they met men foaming at the mouth and spitting up chunks of their own lungs. The chemical burns ate the soldiers from the inside out, and to the Germans, it looked like they were about to fight the undead. After the Germans unleashed the lethal gas, all seemed lost. There were so few Allied soldiers left, and all of them were so close to their mortal end. Many could barely stand, and most were bleeding internally, and their breathing was painful and ragged. Headquarters had instructed the dying men to hold the line at all costs. Rather than just staying put, they decided to mount a counterattack. They quickly formed a plan on how to approach the German line, knowing they would probably fail. The Germans marched forward, assuming the gas either rendered their enemy incredibly weak or ended their lives. They guessed wrong. The Russians charged toward the Germans with their bayonets. They were terrified of the ghoulish-looking soldiers, and they started to fall back. The Germans turned tail and ran so suddenly that they could not even destroy or keep the machine guns they were using. They ran into their own wire traps and suffered several casualties. The Russians fired at their foe, and soon they'd retaken the land and successfully repelled the Germans against seemingly impossible odds. The entire 226th Infantry Regiment Zemelinsky went down in history, but one name stands out among the rest: Sub-Lieutenant Vladimir Kotlinsky. He was not a high-ranking official, but in the face of insurmountable odds, he rallied the remaining troops and told them a terrifying but brave plan. He said that they were going to do a counterattack as the Germans marched in, intending to break their lines and retake ground in trenches. It was a hopeless mission, but they decided to go down fighting. As the strike mounted, Kotlinsky passed from his wounds. After driving off the Germans, every soldier exposed to a high level of chlorine gas died. The gas extinguished at least 7 high-ranking officers, and roughly 200 additional soldiers passed. Evacuation order came, and everyone spared from exposure to lethal levels of gas fell back. As the Russians left, they destroyed the fortress, leaving it as little more than rubble and ruins.